Hello and welcome to my digital talk. Today I have a very special guest, an extraordinary personality, a living legend, one of his kind, Mr. Malmgren. Harald Malmgren does not need an introduction. However, I should introduce him to those of you who haven't met him yet or haven't had the chance to read some of his analysis. Currently, he serves as president of Malmgren Global Advisory Hub, which is basically a consulting company advising global institutional asset managers. And he is one of the most recognized experts on global trade, geostrategy, and geopolitics. And he also has served under 4 US presidents' administrations. So he brings in also a lot of experience when it comes to assessing the current US administration and also previous US administrations. But today, the topic of our discussion is focused on something much bigger. We would like to provide a kind of a helicopter view, a kind of a 10,000 miles view on global affairs. And what we are going to discuss with Harald is the global system transformation. So if there is one particular event that this COVID-19 pandemic has exposed throughout the last year, it is that all these transformational processes that have been basically taking place within the socio-economic systems of the current global system have been in fact taking place already prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic has accelerated some of these transitions. And this is what I would like to discuss with Harald Malmgren today, because we are witnessing unprecedented speed and scope of transformation in the global economy, in global finance, in global trade, but also in technology. So having this in mind, I would like to ask you, dear Harald, what is your take? What is your now primary view, let's put it that way, on what is going on following COVID-19 when it comes to technology 4.0? What is also your anticipation for these transitional processes, and where do you see the most important shifts in the upcoming months or years?
Velina, it's a pleasure to talk with you because apart from being fun to talk with you, you have a vision of global power structure that is much broader than most of the analysts. So let me begin with where is the popular discussion, the mainstream media, the speeches of politicians today? It's all about broken supply chains, and let's get back to 2019 because everything was rosy, and now it's all been disrupted. And let's end the lockdowns everywhere. Let's go back. But the world has been changing. It was changing, as you say. It's changing faster now. And so when there is a discussion, we need to get back to globalization. We have to get summits in motion. We have to get multilateral talks in motion. In most countries, the people are not thinking about globalization. They're thinking about their own circumstances. And in the meantime, industry, to the extent it's moving, is not moving in relation to what's happening in China anymore. Because China is also slowing down. Its economy looks like it's barely growing, even though the public figures are strong. But and Europe is in a period of economic decay, partly due to the pandemic, partly due to other things. So the world, but if we go back to 2019 for a moment, it was a year in which world industry was slowing down. There was a notable contraction underway. And that hasn't changed. That has nothing to do with the pandemic. So where we are now is technology has been moving. And it's moving faster now than it was over the last 40 or 50 years. It's what I call Industry 4.0. What we have learned to make with big furnaces and iron ore and steel structures is history. What is now happening is an entirely new way of fabricating what we need. Part of it is called 3D printing. The ability to send specifications to MIT or some industrial enterprise to far parts of the world and instruct the making of that thing without big furnaces, without elaborate production lines, without large-scale production. And it's primarily due to the emergence of new man-made materials that are not dug out of the ground, but are created by humans. And these new materials, in many cases, are stronger than steel or titanium or other traditional metals. And it's difficult for everyone to understand, but this is really transformational. But what's more important is this work can be done on a different scale, much smaller scale. In fact, the new industrial structure we're going to see is not based on large-scale production. It's not Henry Ford discovering bigger the production, the lower the cost. It's going to be small-scale production is efficient and maybe more efficient than large-scale. A break with the past. So new materials, a change in the scale, and then the ability to do this in remote places, greater localization. What it also means is less digging up the earth and moving material thousands of miles across the Atlantic or Pacific. For economies, what is happening on a global scale is becoming less important. And what is important is what is happening in the region of the people making and consuming. It's a new opportunity for progress to be made on a regional or local basis without regard to what happens among the great powers. So this is really important, and by the way, it has big implications for the issues of renewables versus non-renewables. I think the long-term trend line is that we will use less and less of the non-renewable materials. We will dig up less and less of the earth. We will more and more create what we need. And this is going to have much bigger consequences for climate change, positive consequences than anybody's thinking about. So I want to look first at not at Russia, China, and the U.S. because I think all of this is not related to. It's more focused. It's more regional. I would want to look at what is possible at the regional level among a smaller number of countries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have to unpack a little bit because what you've mentioned with with the increasing importance of regions is very much also related to two issues. One is, of course, that we are in the middle of a new industrial revolution that is very much linked also to the transformational processes that you've mentioned. And the second is that we are also in the middle of a new systemic rivalry between two systems of power. And I would like to ask you, how do you link all of this together? Now, if we have in mind that during the previous industrial revolutions, there were indeed also two competitors. So basically, the first and the second industrial revolutions were the ones that made Great Britain this global power. And then, if we look back to the third industrial revolution, it was about the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. Once again, two competitors. And right now, we are in a similar situation with China and with the United States, trying to basically ride the wave of the fourth industrial revolution. We don't know exactly what the outcome of this competition will be in terms of digitalization, in terms of technological breakthroughs, in terms of who the winner of this industrial revolution will be. Do you think that this will be decisive for the outcome of the transformation, of the global system transformation? Because the winner imposes its rules, its norms, its standards, its moral standing, if you like? Or do you think that this is irrelevant?
This is a fundamentally important question, but the presumption of the media and much of political science is that China is on the rise. And the question is, will it eclipse America or will it not? China has been growing fast and has been building a military capability to, let's say, defend its position. But I've been looking at China since Mao, or since even before Mao. I have met with some of the most senior Chinese a couple of times over the decades. China is at a moment where it has to choose between more centralization, more central direction of everything, or whether it can continue with a fair amount of freedom for individual innovation, for new startups and technology and businesses. And I think the centralization is going to overwhelm, and it will be crippled. Now, I watched in the 80s all these stories about Japan was going to emerge and pass the U.S. and it would become number one. And of course, it stumbled and fell into decades of stagnation. I think China is on that path. But I think U.S. domination is also going to erode, simply because it will be possible for individual countries to do what they want to do independently. And the dependence of everybody on world trade is going to die down. I think world trade is not going to keep growing. I don't think we're going to have shipping manufacturers far and wide. I think we're going to have less and less of that, more and more making things locally. And so I'm not so much bothered by this power rivalry. The U.S. wants to have everybody on some kind of rules-based system. Everybody follows the same rules, although the U.S. is not saying there is only one set of rules. The Chinese are saying, you've got to do it our way, and lately they've been saying, and you can't even consider theoretically alternatives because we are the one true way. it's like a cult being imposed on the world, and I think the pushback will be huge. So I think the two powers slowly become less relevant to where we are going, at least for a while. We can get into military in a few moments, but first, let's look at what is happening. Even the European Union, as a single point of integration, is under pressure and fraying. There is disintegration. It's visible with the vaccine debacle, but it's happening in all kinds of areas of EU efforts to integrate more and running up against problems. And then within the EU, we have fraying political centers. Germany is now seeming to lose coherence politically within Germany, and France the same. The power structures are, in a sense, crumbling, and in that process, this allows innovation, new initiatives, and so what has been the response? We can see that some parts of the EU, like Spain, have been concentrating on opening a pathway into northern Africa through Morocco. And we can see Italy has been trying to see its future as more of a Mediterranean economy engine. And now we see Turkey, even Turkey, who would have thought of that 5 years ago, is opening up pathways to the Middle East and to Africa with its adventures in places like Azerbaijan. We see new initiatives coming from the Baltic countries to open the way from the Baltic Sea downwards to the Mediterranean through what was the Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe, and is now the countries of Europe that are to the east of the original 6 or 7 countries that made up the EU. All of this is underway. Nobody talks about it, but the decisions being made are independent of each other. Professor Tantrum, I think a colleague of yours, has done hugely useful work on explaining to the world all of these developments. And we can see the same process going on in the Pacific, with some of the lesser countries feeling they don't want to be dominated by China, formulating ways of interacting with each other. And so, yes, the dragon bear, the China-Russia rivalry with the U.S., it's interesting, but I think it's slowly becoming less relevant.
Mm-hmm. So I will actually have Professor Tanghum as my guest next month. So I hope very much to discuss with him the connectivity projects and possibilities in the wider Mediterranean area. However, I would like to ask you that what in your opinion which regions will be relevant and will lead the way on this global industry transformation? Where will be the most, so to say, important global power competition observed in your view?
Well, the question of global power is an interesting one. There's political power and military power. Political power was important in the last few decades because it involved which country had money and how much could they bring to the other countries. So the U.S. had power because it had money in the post-World War II period, And then there's the military power. U.S. still is the dominant political power, but um, there's less money flowing around through state-sponsored flows. The Chinese tried to build up on that model with the Belt and Road Initiative, but now they're running into all kinds of problems and pushback from recipient countries. And it's looking like it may come to a dead end before long. The U.S. doesn't have the ability to just push money out. Where the rivalry may eventually evolve is in the military area, but unfortunately for China is maybe 30 years behind the U.S. So I'm not really focused on that, except to say that the press and media have completely overlooked a transformation of the U.S. military assertion of power. Even politicians in Washington haven't really been aware of it. So let me take two examples. One is Europe. In the last few months, the U.S. reactivated what we call the Second Fleet, our Navy, the Second Fleet, and established in recent weeks in Norfolk, Virginia, something called the Joint Force Command. Not joint forces, Joint Force Command. Now, what is it? What it is U.S., UK, the four Scandinavian countries, and a few other countries, including Netherlands and Portugal applying to join, even Bulgaria applying to join, have established joint military operations capabilities in case of conflict. And it's been done silently. It's sort of part of NATO, sort of not part of NATO. NATO considers it a helpful addition. But the joint force covers the area from far into the Arctic all the way down to places like Albania, where there is a very big base. Recently, 4 B-1 bombers were flown to the Arctic from the U.S. Nobody really thought about what the heck is that all about. But it was part of the Joint Force Command of putting the backstop in place. And those planes were met in the air by the Swedish Air Force, welcoming them, even though Sweden theoretically is not part of all this. All of this and all of these different militaries are working on a single electronic integration command structure. In effect, a new military has been created, just silently. And in the Pacific, the U.S., Japan, and Australia have become highly integrated so that they are functioning as one military, with the addition that Australia is now building an industrial defense capability. They are, for example, building military submarines in Australia that even the U.S. will purchase. India may be drawn into this. So these are new configurations. The public isn't really aware of them, but do they show power? Yes. And when you look at it that way, Chinese capability is slowly being pushed back. And Russia is not a player in this. Russia doesn't have the resources militarily. Russia can be provocative and troublesome at the perimeter, with hacking and misinformation, mischief in the financial area, but they really are not. Russia cannot possibly tolerate any hard exchange of weaponry. It would be devastating for Russia to have any form of land, sea, or air conflict, even for a few days. So all of this is also in the background. But what interests me is the formation of countries that are now exploring new modes of transit to use the new capabilities of industry to make things anywhere. It's being discovered that what one makes and where they make it and how they make it is going to be very different from what it's been over the last 100 years. And this means opening the way from the Baltic Sea all the way down through Eastern Europe and into Northern Africa. There will be huge opportunities. I think there'll be huge opportunities in North Africa, going through Algiers and Morocco. And that is slowly going to bring to Central Africa the advances that they have long been unable to exploit.
Mm-hmm. However, if we consider that there are new fluid configurations of state actors along geopolitical and geoeconomic interests, so we should also consider the fact that they need supply chains. And looking at the map, and particularly the case now with the Suez Canal, made it quite clear that they are still very much the same global choke points, which are most significant for the global flows of trade. So basically global flows of goods and services and capital and so on. And the Suez Canal is one of these global choke points. Many of them are along significant maritime routes. And given that reality, do you think that new global supply chains will emerge out of the reconfigurations? Or do you think that the reconfigurations will actually provoke a kind of disruption of these global supply chains in a way that we will witness even more disruptions, which of course might unleash cascading effects on global trade and global economy? Just to give once again the example, with the blockade of the Suez Canal, this is such a costly event. I mean, the very reason that it took days to, to clear the canal for, for the transport. It costs huge amounts of money to do so. So, do you think that this will have an effect on the global supply chains, this kind of reconfigurations, or do you see it rather as an emergence of new supply chains? You mentioned the Arctic, and we know that most of the Arctic countries, but particularly non-Arctic countries such as China, are trying to already step into this geo-economic space due to the environmental changes and the climate change. Basically, there will be a possibility for a new transport route there, probably much earlier than anticipated, likely in the next 10 years. 15 years maybe. Another one you mentioned also with the connectivity from north to the south, from the northern Europe to Africa. So basically also bypassing some of these major geopolitical spaces and specifically global choke points. What is your view on that? How do you see this in the big picture, the importance of the current global systems disruptions and reconfigurations?
Well, about supply chains, from about the late 1970s until now, after my work in government public service, I had deep involvement with a handful of the world's very biggest manufacturing firms. And so I'm really familiar with the concepts, for example, that Toyota brought to the world are called just-in-time inventory. Don't hold inventories. Time the arrival of all materials and equipment needed and parts needed to when you need them from around the world, and go for the cheapest source and concentrate your effort on just-in-time cheapest sources. And then at the time of the tsunami earthquake, the last big one in Japan, it became a severe disruption to the entire auto industry of the world because the microprocessors used in most high-end automobiles everywhere all came from one small area in Japan. And that after that, the conversation among supply chain managers were, just in time is great, but now we need just in case. We have to start thinking about what if there's a disruption of any of these chains. And that work has been going on steadily now for a dozen, 10 years, and it's continuing. And all over the world, supply chain managers are thinking, can we bring the sourcing of supplies closer to the market, closer to the primary companies? Do we really have to use the oceans and the air to move stuff far when we might as well do it close by? Now that is well underway. That's not new. It's intensifying now. But what we see day to day is a lot of supply chains interrupted because it takes years for odds and ends of supply chains to show themselves. We weren't aware in the case of vaccines for the pandemic, many of the ingredients came from India. We assume it was somehow manufactured right nearby, and it turns out not so. But changing the sources, changing what you use, takes time. It's not a tomorrow morning change. It's over the next 5 or 10 years. How do we reconfigure what materials we use and where we assemble them or pull them together to make things? So I think that process is underway, has been underway when we shifted from just in time to just in case, and will continue. But most of industry, big industry worldwide, is now thinking strategically. Can we make these things more close to central hubs? Now, let me give an example. The vaunted German auto industry, we think of it as everything coming from Germany, but Japan, particularly Toyota, in the late 70s and 80s and 90s, began moving a large part of their world production to the U.S. And today, if you wanted to buy a made in USA automobile with the highest U.S. content, you have no choice. You have to buy a Toyota. You might find a few Hondas that have this. GM, Ford, and Chrysler can't do that. They don't have that capability because Japan makes most of its stuff for the U.S. market inside the U.S. But now, interestingly, the big three Germans have been studying this and have been slowly dipping their toes in the state of Alabama in the U.S. And today I found recently that Mercedes-Benz, of course, everyone knows, makes a lot of SUVs. But the biggest source of SUVs for Mercedes-Benz actually is not Germany anymore, it's Alabama. And of the production in Alabama, more than half is exported from the U.S. to China and Latin America. In other words, the U.S. has become an export platform for Germany. And sourcing of materials and parts, it's all becoming Americans. It's closing around that hub. So I think we just have to assume that long-distance supply chains are slowly going to disappear. Now, that remains the question of special materials like rare earth materials. But we're finding two solutions. Number one, we're finding there are more rare earth materials right in the neighborhood if we just go looking for them, even in the U.S. Or they're in oddball places like Greenland, which is rich with rare earth materials. Or we are discovering we can ask MIT to generate some new materials that aren't there but will do the job. And all of that is going, that business of new materials is really blossoming. The interesting side point is that over the last few years, most of the students at places like MIT were interested in electrical engineering or financial engineering, but nobody was interested in mechanical engineering and material science. But now that's the hot subject. Just doing everything in new ways with our hands or with our minds. So supply chains, yes, big issue right at the moment. And then, of course, you have something like transportation choke points. But I think we're going to open up a completely new modes of transportation. And what I foresee is that long distance shipping that requires going through the Suez or through Panama is going to be less important because we're not going to ship so much stuff so far. We're going to ship less less heavy traffic. So in other words, I wouldn't invest in the future of big container ships. I would invest in new sources and new transportation modes in the regions, waterways in Europe, railroads in Northern Africa. Railroads will be really big throughout Northern Africa.
Mm-hmm. But then again, if you look at how each of the industrial revolutions was also shaped by a new way of energy resources. Now, starting with the steam power, use of fossil fuels, then moving to electrical power, then moving to nuclear power. Do you think that the new industrial revolution will be shaped now by the introduction of, the increased introduction of renewables, or do you think that we are going to come up with a new way of energy supply, or do you think that we just go back to the traditional ways of energy supply? So obviously, this kind of what kind of sense do you make of this major decarbonization agenda by the developed economies? That's my first question. And how about you mentioned also the case of rare earth materials. However, we also know that these are very, very dirty industries, and the only reason why, for instance, developed economies basically shifted the production of in exploration and production of these rare materials to third countries was the reason that they wanted to have it clean at home and in the direct neighborhood. Meanwhile, European Union member states are dependent to over 90% on exports from China when it comes to rare materials, and to some extent also on other third countries. So do you think that this is going to be a case now, combined with this kind of decarbonization and greening of economies, that it's going to be in a conflict with this ambitious agenda? So do you think that it's coming back home in reality? Like you said, like you pointed out, there are also other things to take away.
Well, look, the big countries, Europe, US, and Asia, have been exploring all kinds of different energies, some successfully, some not. But we've wasted money and time fooling with wind power, where the machinery to catch the wind power is hugely costly, not only in money, but in terms of energy needed to make the parts. We've been trying to find ways not to use coal, not to use oil and gasoline as much, but we've spent a lot of money going down dead ends or dark alleys, whereas longer term, the options we've in a sense swept aside because of fear. Nuclear types of energy generation. Now, the progress has been made in nuclear energy, but not visibly. For example, we have Marines posted in faraway places in the Arctic, and you get a few hundred Marines sitting in a place and they need energy, and there are no power lines. What do they use? Well, nowadays they can make very small nuclear reactors, and the cost is not that high. Let me say that we even can use 3D printing to make a small nuclear reactor just to source power for a small number of people stationed somewhere in a remote place. It's amazing how much change has been going on. But governments have been shy because of the perception that nuclear power is unsafe. And of course, Germany led the way in just banning, it was mindless banning of nuclear power, which has put Europe hostage of all sorts of other sources of energy. It put Germany in a position where it needed more pipelines from Russia. Now, in the U.S., we've had actually abundance of gas, and we probably have enough gas for the U.S. If we were to just revert to natural gas, we probably have enough gas to last 2 or 3 centuries without much change. But we've been shunning away, not, lately the theme is let's not build more pipelines, but natural gas is clean burning. So we've been exploring around, wasting time and money. 10 years ago, I was an advisor for a while on a Japanese project sponsored by the Ministry of Economy and Trade to put satellites up to collect power from the sun well above, out in outer space, and transport the power to Earth by what's called Tesla transmission. Nothing to do with Tesla cars, but Nikola Tesla, the scientist. And that research continues and is now being looked at by national labs in the U.S. and other places. I somewhere out there 10, 20 years, but not forever. So we have hydrogen power, which is thought to be unworkable, but some companies I know think it is workable, and not in the U.S., but some companies in other countries. So I'm not, I don't think the story of energy is closed. What the sources are, maybe the biggest choke point is storage of energy, that is batteries. How do we can get energy to places, but how do we keep it there for a while? But that awful lot of research is going into that also. So I just don't see the energy problem in the way that everybody else is talking about it, as here, this is all fixed and we have few options. I don't think that's true. I think you have lots of options.
Mm-hmm. And what is your anticipation about the likelihood of a second Cold War-like scenario between China and United States. You said at the beginning that you are actually not convinced of of a systemic rivalry between these two powers. And you've also outlined your reasons why you think that also China is going to face a lot of problems at home, so domestic problems. And also you've pointed out that the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is actually already facing serious issues. However, do you think that this kind of systemic competition between Washington and Beijing will further deepen? And do you think that it would affect global affairs and specifically the relations with third countries, be it rivals or competitors or allies? What is your take? I think that we lost Harald for a moment. I will be waiting for him to return to the digital room in a second. So basically, why I asked this final question on the systemic rivalry is basically linked to my main thesis that this systemic competition between China and United States is going to encompass all these relevant transformational processes in the socioeconomic systems, the way we know them, the way they have been actually built and established and further shaped in the last 30 years. And now with the emergence of a second system of power, which is Beijing, there's going to be a kind of a clash or a conflict, confrontation, not necessarily in terms of military, direct military conflict, however, in a sense of a competition to control and to influence the socioeconomic systems. So my personal take is that it would be in the interest of Beijing to facilitate its alternative networks through alternative supply chains. This is already being the case, for instance, in Central Asia and in parts of South Asia, Southeast Asia, where Beijing has already started building this kind of connectivities within the Belt and Road Initiative projects, so to say, to connect China with third countries, mostly focused on the industrialized heart in Western Europe. So basically, this kind of connectivities should go through terrestrial links in Central Asia, also Russia. But then again, if you look carefully, we meanwhile see that there is another alternative route connecting China with Turkey and the Black Sea area, which is why there is an increased interest by Beijing to also facilitate political economic relations with the former Soviet bloc in Europe, which is the famous 17+1 initiative. And then again, we have another terrestrial connectivity, which goes from China to the Indian Ocean via Pakistan. This is the famous economic corridor that also entails, meanwhile, a port. This is the Gwadar port. So basically, there is already kind of alternative connectivity emerging out of these projects. And this was also part of my question. I very much hope that we will get him back on the live stream. So I will be waiting for some further 5 minutes and in order to continue the digital book. In the meantime, what I also wanted to draw your attention Moscow. So he's right now calling me on the phone.